When we left off in John 19, we saw Jesus on the cross. So the nails had been driven, the cross had been hoisted. He was crucified, but he was still alive. The last that we studied, Jesus was still alive, hanging on the cross, and that's where we're going to begin tonight. We'll pick up in John chapter 19, verse 19. 19, really easy to remember. We probably are only going to get to around verse 30. If we get to about verse 27 and kind of run out of time, then we'll save verses 27 through 30 for next week, because it's really important. So if I can't give that proper attention tonight, we're going to hold that off. But we're going to shoot for verse 30, and then next week we're going to be dealing with the aftermath of the death of Messiah. So you'll probably see that word aftermath appear in the sermon title, the teaching title next week, because that's what we're going to be dealing with next week. Jesus will have died. If we get to verse 30, Jesus will have died, and now everything that happens after verse 30 is the fallout, the aftermath of that. You'll see disciples scrambling in panic. You'll see the attempt of the religious leaders to tidy up loose ends and make sure that the Jesus story doesn't continue, make sure that's the death of the whole Jesus movement. So aftermath next week. But tonight we're looking at Jesus still on the cross here. And let's begin reading at verse 19 and see how far we can get. Verse 19. Now Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Verse 20. Then many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. All right, first off, the location of Christ's crucifixion was very conspicuous. It was in an elevated spot. As the scripture here said, it was near the city. And since God wanted Christ on the cross to be conspicuous, he wanted it to be obvious, he wanted it to be visible to as many people as possible. And because of that, what better strategy than for God to deliver his son Jesus to the Romans for crucifixion? Because this is what the Romans did. They believed in crucifying their criminals in the most visible of places, so that, as we said before, the message of Rome could hit home with those that saw the crucified criminal. Well, Rome and God just happened to be on the same page there. They wanted everyone to see the death of Jesus. And God, since God, he is the same yesterday, today, and forever, he still wants that. He still wants the cross to be conspicuous. He wants that symbol to be seen by the world. For the Bible student, it's a symbol that you can even see in the Old Testament. I look forward to pointing out some of those opportunities. But from the pattern of the sprinkling of the blood on the doors in that first Passover, you see the symbol of a cross. From the alignment of the encampments of the children of Israel in the New Testament, you see the alignment, the pattern of a cross. From the serpent on a pole, there are many different other Old Testament analogies that we can look back to and see the cross. But one thing is for certain, that someone living in the Old Testament times would not as readily and quickly be able to pick up on the symbolism of that cross. It's not until you become a New Testament scholar on the other side of things that you can look back and very clearly see the cross all throughout the Old Testament. And now there are no question marks as it pertains to the cross. And the cross isn't in hiding anymore. You know, it was concealed in the Old Testament. That old saying, in the New Testament is revealed, what is in the Old Testament concealed. All right, the Old Testament is concealment, but the cross is out in the open now in John 19. It's no longer in hiding from crucifixion until 2017 and continuing on clear until the very end. The cross is now going to continuously be seen as this symbol before the eyes of the world so that they can't miss it. And I trust that it's a major emphasis in your own life to make the cross of Christ seeable to family, to friends, to people that know you, to people that you bump into along the streets, whatever it might be. Although probably not many of us walk the streets much like we used to. We have cars now, but whatever it might be, that's a major emphasis and push in your life to make the cross of Christ visible to the world around you. Because only in the cross is there salvation. You can't find it anywhere else. There's nothing else that we can point the world to that can really give them any kind of lasting and impacting help and change and anything like that. It's all going to be found in the cross. So you won't find hope anywhere other than the cross, and neither will your friends. And that's why we seek to make the cross visible. It's very clearly the heart of God that the cross be seen in the world that we live. There's something else here that Pilate wants to be made known on this day. He wants to make sure that the Jews don't get off easy after crucifying their king. And so he wants them embarrassed a little bit, and he wants to shame them a little bit. And to make sure that everyone gets his point, Pilate has the title of Jesus written out in the three major languages of the day. Now, Hebrew was the theological language. Greek was the intellectual language. And then Latin was the political language or governmental language. So what you see here is God being very thorough here because he has a message to give to the world. The message is that Jesus Christ is the King. And that's something that he wants the world to know, because if the kingdom is something that we're all supposed to be pressing into, then it's pretty important that we know who the King is. And it's very important that we see that. So this all-important message that God wants to get to the people there, he makes sure that he covers all his bases. He gets this message out to the spiritual, that is Hebrew. He gets this message out to the rational, that is Greek. He gets this message out to the politicians, perhaps those that need it the most, which would be the Latin. So that really whatever kind of man or woman you were in this day and age, that Jesus was hanging on the cross, whatever kind of man or woman that you were, if you were there cross-eyed, you could look up and read God's words about Jesus. It's the reason, the same kind of reason that I think church signs are important today. You know, there are a lot of church signs, and I think they serve a good purpose. They're not always used as well as they could be, but what a good thing for people to drive down the road, see your church building, see a sign for your church, maybe some kind of message on that marquee that encourages an unbeliever to think about Jesus and to consider Jesus and to ask the what-if questions. What if those people meeting inside that building actually know what they're talking about? What if that stuff is actually true? So those signs that we have today, just like the sign above Jesus, they convey important messages. Sometimes you see some really bad church signs and you're like, oh no, just quit or do better, or just put something, just general, like this is a church, please come. Like for instance, this week I was looking at some of these bad church signs on the internet as I was thinking about the sign above the cross of Jesus. And we covered a few of these before, but I just want to bring some of them back and add a few new ones. The first sign that I looked at said, this was a church marquee, and the sign said, "Don't let worries kill you, let the church help." I think they needed a few extra words there. The next one, I don't know about this church. The next one said, "We love hurting people." Not quite sure how they meant that. That's one of those attendee bewares right there. This next one really struck home with me. It said, "Having trouble sleeping? Come listen to our sermons." I thought, that's not really the message you want to convey about your pastor, is it? This one's even worse. It says, "Do you know what hell is? Come hear our preacher." That just doesn't sound good for the preacher there. And one of my all-time favorites is a marquee church sign that says, "Prophecy class canceled due to unforeseen circumstances." I'm not sure you really want to attend that prophecy class, They really don't seem to have a whole lot of foresight there. Finally, one of my favorites from just this last week as I was looking at it, it was a sign that said, "Get behind me, Satan," Satin. So I was thinking that there's either a very picky seamstress that's in charge of doing that church sign, or a very poor speller, one or the other. Get behind me, Satin. But anyway, in light of that, I just feel a pressing need to send out a call to the church around us to do a better job with your signs. We need to do better than that, and some of them were so bad I can't even say them in here. But there were some good ones. There was a local one that was really good that I really liked. It was one of the local churches here in Uniontown, maybe a month or two ago, and it said, "If you're looking for a sign that you should come to church, this is it." And I thought, that's just perfect, Even people that don't believe in God, they talk about seeing, having signs. It's a sign. You hear them say that, and they don't believe in God, and you're like, a sign from what? A sign from who? What are you talking about? You don't believe in God. But that's a good one, If you're looking for a sign that you should come to church, this is it. And then there was one last good one on the internet that I'll share with you. I liked it. It said, blah, 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 you need to come to church. Perfect. That's something I would write and put on a church marquee. But, these signs are important. You see them all through the Old Testament, these signs that point you to who Jesus is, what his roles were, who he could and should be to you. You see that same kind of sign, that same kind of message being conveyed on the cross of Christ, that he is the King of the Jews, which meant a whole lot of things by implication, that he was Messiah, that he was the Son of God, that he was divine, all of those things from the Old Testament prophecies. A lot of implication packed into that little sign that Pilate hung up there. And we have church signs today all trying to point the world to Jesus. They're important. They're all through the Bible. They've been with us since the beginning of time, essentially, pointing us to Jesus. And this is a good one hanging right above his cross. Verse 21 says, "Therefore the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, 'Do not write the King of the Jews, but just write that he said, I am the King of the Jews.'" You can see where this might not sit well with these guys, right? Because they had already said in unison as a crowd, Luke chapter 19, verse 14, "We will not have this man rule over us. We will not have this man reign over us. We don't want him as our king." And they've said just in John 19, verse 15, we covered this not that long ago, although it seems like a very long time ago. But they said, "We have no king but Caesar." So they most certainly don't want to look up and read this title hanging above the body of Jesus, whom they just crucified. They were okay with it being a claim. They said, to Pilate, if you just write that he said he was the King of the Jews, we're okay with that. We're okay with it being a claim, because if it's just a claim, we feel better about still being able to direct our shame upon him for making such an audacious claim and not being the right one, right, to fulfill the claim. But it's different if it's not written as a claim and if it's written as a fact or a statement, as Pilate had it laid out, because then that makes them look bad. Because how unthinkably idiotic is it for a nation to execute their innocent king? It just doesn't sit well with those that would look upon the nation of Israel at the time. So it would look much better if it were just a claim. But look at this, verse 22. Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Now, that seems out of place for Pilate's character, because as we have witnessed in our study through the scriptures, throughout this whole ordeal, Pilate has one major all-consuming struggle, and that is the struggle to find the ability to take a stand and do the right thing. He has not been able to do that up until this point. He has been an absolute coward. He's given in to every demand that the religious leaders had. He has bent and buckled time and again. He's given in. He's shown no leadership. He's shown no backbone. But in this one moment of time, somehow, through a flash of bravado, this guy Pilate finally finds his gumption and takes a stand on something. I'm surprised to see it. And if we learn one lesson from the life of Pilate, it's just to do the right thing. Stand up for Christ, no matter what the expected outcry might be, no matter what the expected outcome. It's just to know to do right, to know that Christ is who he is, to take a stand on that, and then let whatever happens, happens, and and understand that the most pressing thing there is doing the right thing. It's really not that difficult yet in the country that we live in. I mean, not many people in America are going to kill you because you take a stand for Christ. I said not many because it does occasionally happen even in this country. But right now it's not all that challenging to take a stand for Christ. I know the devil can back us into a corner and make us feel like it is because we worry about silly things like, what if that person stops liking me because I take a stand for Christ? Or, what if they think I'm a party pooper? Or whatever it might be. All of these very insignificant question marks that the enemy would want to put in our mind that in light of eternity aren't even worth consideration. Sometimes we bite on some of those and we keep quiet and we don't make our stands. But if we learn anything from Pilate, it's that we should make the stand on the truth. We should stand up for Christ, and it's always going to work out better for us if we do. It always. And I always say that, the time is coming when taking a stand for Christ is going to cost you your head, quite literally. If you don't make the rapture, and you're here for the tribulation period, Revelation chapter 6 through 19, if you determine to become a Christian during that period, you will have to lose your head. You will have to lose your life to take a stand for Christ. So, if you can't live for Christ now, chances are when you get to the tribulation period, you're not going to be willing to die for Christ. That's tougher. Start right here and live for Christ. If you can live for Christ now and continue to build up your strength to the point where one day you can die for him, then you got a shot. But you're not going to get to hard times and say suddenly, all right, I got what it takes. I'm going to lay it all down for Christ. So get your practice now while things are easy. Just find your backbone. Learn from Pilate. Don't follow his example. Follow the examples of some of the other people that we're going to see here at the foot of the cross in a very dangerous moment in time. They have a backbone, and we're going to see what their motivator is when we get there. Verse 23, then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to each soldier a part, and also the tunic. Now the tunic or coat or robe was without seam, woven from the top in one piece. Verse 24, they said therefore among themselves, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be, that the scripture might be fulfilled, which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Therefore the soldiers did these things. Now, just in case I don't want to miss this, and since the thought is right in the front of my mind, I'm going to say it. Just so you know, a lot of the gospel writers, well, I make it sound like there's like 40, but the other gospel writers, a lot of times will give us these details and won't necessarily connect it to a bigger theme or a bigger message. John is pretty good about doing that because, as we've mentioned many, many times now, John's concern is to make sure that no matter what passage you're dropped into in the Gospel of John, as you're looking at the life of Jesus, he wants you to know that Jesus was what? In full control. And that God knew everything that was going to happen to Jesus. And so that is John's focus as he sees what could look like a focus on a very disrespectful and horrible thing that happened to Jesus. But John's focus isn't on the fact that they were really heartless and they were gambling for his clothes as he's hanging there dying. John's focus is this: yeah, that happened, but there's a bigger picture. There's a bigger story behind the scenes. There's a reason why that happened, and John points us to the Old Testament scriptures and says it happened because God said it was going to happen a long time ago. So when you're dropped into some of the other Gospels and you read these little sections and you just go, oh, well, I guess this is in here so that I can understand how horrible things were for Jesus. John doesn't want to do that. John wants you to say, here's why this is in here. It's just to let you know that the program is on track. It's just to let you know that Jesus is fulfilling all of the Old Testament prophecies, one after another, to the point where the Old Testament scriptures prophesy about them gambling for his garments, and John says, boom, here it is, it happened. So I like John's emphasis. It's just to show us the control, the sovereignty of God. So verses 23 and 24, when Rome executed a criminal, we mentioned this in passing before, that they assigned, let me back up. They crucified their criminals naked, right? And what they did was they assigned a quaternion of soldiers to oversee the death of that specific criminal. A quaternion of soldiers just means 4 soldiers. So at Jesus' death, there were 4 soldiers assigned to him to take him, escort him to the cross, to hang him on the cross, drive the nails in his hand, to make sure that he hung there and make sure that he died. And as part of the perks of being a quaternion responsible to oversee the death of a criminal, you got this privilege of getting to keep, split up among the 4 of you, any of the clothing or possession items that the person to be executed would have on them. And that's what you see taking place here. This was Roman law, that as they crucified a person, whatever they were wearing, they removed it from them and they split it up. What we see in verses 23 and 24 was that Jesus had five items on him. We assume 5 items of clothing, and that is very standard with the time. An average person at this time wore 5 articles of clothing. There was an outer tunic, there was an inner tunic, there was a belt, there were sandals, and a turban on the head. Those were your 5 typical items. We could assume that those were the 5 that Jesus had. We don't know that for sure. We do know that he had a tunic, and we're going to talk about that. So 5 articles that he has on him, and there's how many soldiers? 4. So 5 articles, you got 4 soldiers. So what they do is they take the first 4 articles and they divide them up. Each soldier gets an article. Now when they come to the last article, it is the outer tunic, or the coat, we would say, the robe. When they get to this last item, what they would normally do, normal practice would be to take this one item in order to split it up among the 4. It would be to rip it at the seams and then give each one a section. Now, I know it's not a major gain as far as possession goes, but it's at least a piece of cloth. You can do a lot of stuff with a piece of cloth. You got a hanky, you got an oil rag for changing your oil, Well, they didn't need that back then, but, a lot of purposes that you had for a cloth. But they do something different here, and it's one of the things that stands out to us, like in stark contrast as we're reading this, is that they break from their standard practice of doing things, and they don't tear the garment at the seams and split it up in pieces of cloth. Why don't they do that? Because when they get to this 5th garment, it does not have seams. It's a seamless garment. It was woven from top to bottom, all in one piece, right? No seams on it. And that goes over a lot of people's heads, but what this tells us is that this garment that Jesus had, this cloak, this outer coat, was actually a very expensive piece of clothing. You didn't see this too often. You normally saw sections of cloth that were seamed together to form a coat. Jesus has what appears to be a fairly valuable outer garment, and I admit that when we come to this section, I'm a little surprised to see that Jesus has an expensive article like this, an expensive piece of clothing, because when you study the life of Jesus, you essentially conclude that he was a vagrant pauper. He wandered from place to place. He didn't have a home. One guy shows up at one point and says, "I'm going to follow you," and Jesus says, "Foxes have holes, birds have nests. I don't have a house. I don't have anywhere to go tonight. If you're going to hang around me, what are you going to do? Because I don't have anywhere to stay tonight." He lived life like that. A homeless man, a pauper, a poor guy. I think of the time with the coin when they're talking about taxes. Jesus says, "Someone show me a coin." A lot of people think that's because he didn't have any money on him. I don't know. We know that he did appear to be that way, but when we get to the cross, we discover, those watching him, yes, they would have known about his outer garment for a long time, but we discover at the cross that he had an expensive garment and a cloak, and then there's something even deeper here, something with even more meaning behind it, and that is, as you study the Old Testament, you'll find that in Jewish culture, in Jewish history, there was really only one robe that was known to be made like this, sewn from top to bottom with no seams, and that was a priestly robe that you'll read about in Exodus 28 if you want to take the time to do that. And now that begins to create a very interesting picture for us, because I think what we're seeing here is symbolism of Jesus as the high priest. And as you study through the New Testament, you're going to see that Christ fills 3 roles of ministry. And do you remember what those 3 roles of ministry are? I'm pretty sure we've talked about this at least once. 3 major roles that Jesus filled. He was predicted to fill and then fulfilled them. And they are prophet, priest, and king. Those are the 3 roles of Jesus: prophet, priest, and king. In the Old Testament, you couldn't be all 3. And in the Old Testament, you couldn't even be 2 together. You were like one or the other. You could be, let's see, you weren't supposed to, if I remember correctly, you weren't even supposed to be, according to Old Testament law, a king and a prophet, and yet you do see David as both a king and a prophet. But you were supposed to stay within your roles. You weren't supposed to be all 3. Jesus comes on the scene and fulfills all 3. And those 3 roles, prophet, priest, and king, they were symbolized by the gifts that the wise men, the magi, brought to Jesus as gifts. We got really close to that, and we stepped all around it in our Christmas study, and I was hoping to be able to bring it out, but I never could find the time in one of the teachings. So let's just tidy up that loose end now. Remember the 3 gifts that were brought to Jesus, and remember, if you don't know, well then you're not remembering, you're learning for the first time, but the Magi did not come to Jesus when he was a baby in the manger. I know that's our typical scene, but they came much later in the life of Jesus, probably somewhere around 1 or 2 years of age. He was living at a house at a time. The scriptures do tell us that. He wasn't in a stable anymore. He was in a more stable condition than the stable. He was in a house, and he was a young child at the time, the scriptures say. And these 3 wise men show up with 3 gifts. What were they? Gold, which in the entire Bible, gold is always the kingly metal. It always represents kingship. And then you see the second gift was frankincense. What was frankincense? Frankincense was a spice that the priests used in worship. And we talked not all that long ago about the offering of incense at the altar of incense. This was the spice they used, frankincense. So you have gold symbolizing Jesus as king. You have frankincense symbolizing Jesus as priest. And then what was the last one? Myrrh. Anyone know what myrrh is? Gold, frankincense, myrrh. Myrrh was a spice that was used for embalming dead bodies. So it was the same as getting, for a baby shower gift, embalming fluid. Like they show up at your baby shower, gold, great, we got gold. Money to spend. What's the next one? Frankincense. Whoa, expensive spice. Fragrant spice, great. And then the last guy shows up and you're like, what did this impractical joker bring? He brings myrrh. That's a joke only my kids will get. So he brings myrrh, embalming fluid, to a baby shower? That's a mood killer. That's a party killer. But what is symbolized in the myrrh is the fact that Jesus would be a martyred prophet. So you see all 3 of those ministry roles of Jesus, prophet, priest, and king, symbolized by the gifts. Now, I like how John handled this, the information that was presented in verses 23 and 24, because he tells you that they divided up the garments and then cast lots for the tunic. And he's connecting it to Psalm chapter 22, verse 18, right? And he's telling us everything is going according to plan. This is happening because it was supposed to. And we see Jesus symbolized here, I think, as priest. All right, verse 25. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas or Cleopas, same person. It's the same person, same name you're going to see on the road to Emmaus. So Clopas or Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. Verse 26. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved, who is the disciple that Jesus loved? Who is the disciple who's writing this gospel? Who is the disciple that's too humble to mention his own name? Who is the disciple that feels like Jesus' favorite? That's John. It's the Apostle John, all right? So the disciple whom Jesus loved, standing by, he said to his mother, so Jesus speaking to Mary, his mother, he says, woman, but in a good way, woman. It's that same word, gunai. If you remember a study from John chapter 2 about the wedding and the encouragement by Mary for Jesus to perform a miracle there, come out in the open about who he was and make some more wine for the party. He used that same word, gunai. He said, woman, what does your concern have to do with me? Like, why are you trying to involve me in this? It's not my time. I'm supposed to wait a little while before I go public. Yeah, same word there. It's not an affectionate title, but it's a formal and respectful title, and we're seeing a transition here. We're seeing a switch here. He's not saying mother. He's saying woman. There's a change. I'm leaving. I'm giving you a replacement. So he says, woman, behold your son, my replacement, John. In verse 27, then he said to the disciple that won't mention his name, he says to the disciple, behold your mother. And from that hour, that disciple, the guy that won't mention his name, took her to his own home. So in this story, there's actually a whole lot of Marys here. This is like a meeting of the Marys. If you look at the New Testament, you'll find like 5 major Marys that are spoken about. When you're reading the New Testament and you read the name Mary, don't assume. Find out which Mary it is, if we know. Sometimes we're not real sure because there are so many Marys. It must have been a really popular name back then. But all the Marys are there. The meeting of the Marys is happening. And John is there as well. And they're in a dangerous situation there at the foot of the cross. They have put themselves in harm's way. They've put themselves at risk. We see a lot of women here. We see more than just the 5 Marys, or the Marys that are here, I should say. We see more than the Marys. We see a bunch of women around the cross of Christ in support. So the ladies are very well represented at the cross of Christ. How about the guys? Well, we see one, John, that's it. And because of the danger, we don't see the other 10 guys, the other 10 disciples. Maybe you're thinking, 10? Aren't there 12 disciples? No, we lost one. We lost Judas. And then the 11th disciple, John, is here. So there's 10 other disciples out in hiding. But the ladies are all here. The ladies are supporting. I could bash the guys here. But honestly, I think what's taking place is that the ladies have a much better chance of having their support for Jesus winked at than the men do. I think if the men are here, they're in much greater danger of being put on their own crosses for their support for Christ. But anyway, kudos to the woman for being so well represented at the cross. Here's what we do need to say about John, is that this is gutsy for John to be here. And he will get a pass too. He won't be crucified for his support for Jesus. They will attempt to take his life later. They will attempt to martyr him for his faith. But right now he's safe. He gets away with this. But what he's doing is very dangerous. And there's a really, to me, moving contrast that's made here in this chapter. First, we see a group of men that are completely oblivious and disinterested in the fact that Jesus is being crucified. I mean, he's hanging on a cross, and I pretty much just picture them like with their backs turned to the cross, and they're laughing and they're smiling and they're playing games and they're gambling for garments and they're celebrating what garments they got from the guy that's hanging on the cross behind them. That's the way I picture it. And then in stark contrast, here's these mourners at the cross of Christ, these people that have shown up in support of him, looking into his, looking into his eyes with probably tears in theirs. And so right beside those who could care less, you have those that love him so fiercely that their hearts are just all torn up in this moment. I think of the prophecy of Simeon, who wasn't monkeying around when he told Mary some of the prophecies that were concerning her son Jesus. He said to Mary like this, "A sword will pierce your own soul." Like, he gave all these wonderful things that this child Jesus would do, and then like it's his closer kind of like to say, "Oh, by the way, a sword will pierce your own soul." This child, as great as he's going to be, as wonderful of accomplishments as you're going to see from him, he is going to break your heart, because what you're going to see, and this is the fulfillment of that. Mary's heart here is absolutely breaking because she is seeing her son die on a cross. Can you imagine the heartbreak? I mean, the only way you can do it is if you have kids and you try to envision for yourself your own child or your own children going through some kind of heartless torture and death right before your eyes, and being completely helpless to stop it, basically constricted to merely observing the whole thing. You're just watching your child die. And you feel those maternal, those paternal instincts to protect your child, and you can't. Your child's being crucified, and you can't stop it. I think a love for one's own kids is one of the deepest loves that a person can have. I don't think there's much that goes deeper than that. There was once a study done of 30 women, or I should say 30 men who were on death row for heinous crimes that they had committed. And they interviewed their parents, and they focused on the interviews of the women, the mothers of those kids that had committed these heinous crimes and were like going to be executed for what they did. And 27 of the 30 mothers whose kids, grown-up men, but kids, were going to be executed for horrendous things that they did. 27 of those 30 mothers said something to the effect of this: "He's a good man at heart." And the person interviewing the mother would say, "What are you talking about? Like he killed 20 people with an axe or whatever. Or he took a chainsaw and cut off 3 people's heads," whatever it was. Like, what are you talking about? He's a good person at heart. And the mother would always say something similar to this: deep down, he's got a good heart. The point of that being is that a mother's love is pretty deep, and we can't, guys, I don't know that we can understand it. And I think the only way a woman can understand it is if she's a mother. That is a deep love, and there's a deep love here that is breaking her heart. It appears that she had lost Joseph at some point, because at 12 years of age, when we see Jesus lost in the temple, well, they thought he was lost. He knew he knew where he was. But that's the last we see of Joseph. We don't read any more of it. Through history and tradition, we are told that Joseph died when Jesus was pretty young, probably somewhere after 12 years of age. So we would look at it like this. The story would be that we assume that Mary had already lost her husband, and now she's losing Jesus. Not just a child, but a promised, God-given, supernatural child. The questions just had to be like fireworks in her mind going off about what's taking place, and is there going to be any good that comes from this? And that love and that devotion that she had for her son causes her to just not care what the cost of hanging around the cross would be. She's going to be there with her son to support her son. And you pretty much have these same two groups of people today. You have those whose hearts are stricken by thoughts of the cross. Like when we think of the cross, our hearts are just broken. We're just kind of like stopped in our tracks, and there's a heaviness and that feeling in the pit of your stomach when you think about what Jesus went through for you. But then you have the other group of people who whose hearts are not moved even in the slightest by even the most graphic and complete descriptions of the cross and all that Jesus did to save them. They have no response to it whatsoever. You see these two groups at the cross. You see them today in the world, and the difference could not be easier to see. The difference is just simply this, that God is doing a work in some people's hearts and God is not doing a work in other people's hearts. It's because some people have allowed God, given him access and permission to do that work, while other people continuously close God out and don't let God work in them. So their hearts never change, and they're never moved by the story of the cross. They're never moved by the explanations of the love of Jesus for them. It doesn't sink in. It doesn't have an effect. There's no accomplishment there. But I want to encourage you to never give up on the second group of people who just don't seem to be moved at all by anything that you tell them about Jesus. I'm telling you, do not give up on those people. Because even here, according to Scripture, by the time that this whole thing is over, you'll see that one of these four soldiers, and I'm going to put this in my own words. One of these four soldiers is going to be standing there cross-eyed with one of Jesus' bloody garments in his hand. He's going to look up at the face of Jesus, and he's going to have a change of countenance where there was disinterest before. Now, as he turns to see Jesus on the cross, something is different about his heart. Something changes. There's a work of God in his life, and he makes this statement before it's all said and done. Truly, this was the Son of God. As far as we know, that's the first Gentile convert post-cross. First Jewish convert would be the thief hanging on the cross. And it's tough to understand what changed their hearts or what convinced them that Jesus was God. I don't think if I was a centurion, that would have been the moment where I looked and saw this religious figure in not victory, but utter defeat and death. I don't think it would be at that point that I say, you know what, I'm convinced now. He's God. He's the Son of God. I don't think that would be the seller for me. I think the seller for me would be the resurrection. There's no really logical explanation for the change in this man's heart other than the fact that, and I really like this, that faith doesn't require logic. I love that. Because faith is put in our hearts by God, and we don't have to have a reason. Why did this person believe? Oh, it's because this happened or that happened and convinced them. That's not how faith works. Faith doesn't need proofs per se. Faith doesn't need necessarily logic. Faith is something that God puts in your heart. And one of the four soldiers that we see in this scene tonight, God will do a work in his heart. God will put faith in his heart. And from what we can tell, this man is a believer in Jesus. What he did with that, we don't know. Was it saving faith? It seems like it. We don't know. That knowledge was divine revelation, though. We do know that. Well, so there are no helpless and hopeless causes. Even those that just don't have any interest, keep sharing because it's God that does the work in their hearts. Now, I'm going to try to bring this to a close here. I think we're going to stop before verse 28. The other side of this equation, real quickly. Here at the cross, from this love, we see a family form. And isn't that basically what the Lord has done here at Anchored? I mean, there's a little bit of bloodline in here. You know, I'm related to you. I'm related to you. I'm related to you. You and you. But what God has done here at Anchor is he has formed a family where bloodline really didn't matter, at least not human blood. But God built here at Anchored and is building and will build here at Anchored a family that is built around the cross. And that's what we see here. We see this family take place, this exchange. We see Jesus say, John's my new replacement. Mary, new family member. John's your son now. He's going to take over. John, this is your mother now. John had a mother. He had a mother. She was there at the cross side too. I don't know how she took this news. There might have been some competition there in the future. I don't know. But there is a family that forms at the cross, and family that forms at the cross is strong. Family that forms at the cross can't be broken. And I like that Jesus did this because maybe you're wondering, why would Jesus do this, like replace himself with John, when we know that Mary had 5 other sons, and then she also had daughters? Like, why does really Mary need another kid? She had 5 kids, 5 boys and daughters. We're not sure how many, but those are mentioned in Scripture. Can't she just find comfort in them? But this is the only thing that I can see from this passage, and I think it speaks volumes about the heart of Christ. Number 1, Jesus knows at this point that his brothers do not believe in him. His family does not believe in him. So if you got family members that don't believe you're really saved, or don't really think that you're all that serious about the whole God thing, just be patient with them, because Jesus endured that, and he was perfect. So you're not perfect. You're probably going to have worse problems than Jesus. But his brothers won't get saved until sometime after the resurrection. We don't know how quickly. We don't know how long it took, but we do know that pretty much as soon as we see the early church meeting there in Jerusalem, like central headquarter church right there in Jerusalem, we see the brothers of Jesus as believers. We know that they wrote books in the Bible. So it does appear they get saved pretty quick after the resurrection. So here's what I see. I see Jesus not content with the levels of comfort that her children could bring her, because they were not believers in him. And I think what Jesus was doing was he was looking to replace the love that he had, and I think the closest thing he could find was the Apostle John, who's known as the disciple of love. And what I see here is Jesus unwilling to let Mary go even 3 days without comfort. Unwilling to let her go even these 3 days without someone to step in and at least be close to the same levels of love as him. And he picked a good candidate as far as I'm concerned. He picked the apostle of love, probably the guy that most closely reflected the personality and character of Jesus, the Apostle John. And I want to tell you that we've talked before about the transformation that took place in the Apostle John, who used to be a hothead. And Jesus called him and his brother James the sons of thunder. Like, these guys are fiery. They're lightning bolts. You never know when they're going to go off. And we talk about that transformation to where John is now like this snuggly, cuddly, lovey guy. He's not your expected man's man. But he's had a major character transformation. Here's what I think. I think either way, I think John's at the cross. I think the old John would be here out of bravado. Out of like, I'm ready for a fight. Just let them come after me as I support Jesus. I think the old John would have been here. Maybe not. But what I do know is that the new John is here for a different reason. He's here for the same reason that the mother of Jesus is here. He's here out of his love. I started looking into that as I seen that in Scripture. And I started looking at the characters that we see around the cross. And everyone that we have any detail on, they are there because of love. There's Mary Magdalene, who we know loved Jesus so much. We know that because Jesus picked her out for that. When they were criticizing her, Jesus said, hey, the one who's been forgiven much loves much. In other words, this woman, Mary Magdalene, she loves me a lot. And what I see is that the people that are there are the people that are known for having a deep love for Jesus. And here's the point I think we draw from that. And it's this, is that love for Jesus will take you further than bravado will. Love for Jesus will take you further than your courage can, or your boldness, or anything like that. If you're a courageous person, if you're a brave person, if you're outspoken and you don't care what people think, that's great. Those can be good characteristics if they're channeled right, but they won't take you as far as love will take you. And so the deeper your love, the better chance you have of being there with Jesus at the cross the whole time, no matter what the world says around you.